because usually I do readings as a poet, in which case, very rarely are there more people in the audience than there are up at the podium. Am I right, Joanne?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. It is an honor to be here. I'm so happy to be able to have a warmer evening to share this with you. Not that I don't love winter, but there are limits. Okay, so first off, you do not need to have read Beowulf to read this novel and get what's going on. But I'll want to just kind of set things up a little bit. When I was in undergrad school, I had this amazing teacher. I don't know what he was doing at the small state university that I got my undergrad degree in, but he was amazing. He didn't stay there. He had either an Oxford degree or something like that, went on, but in the small group of medieval lit students that I was in, he did the Old English side by side with the translation. He did it in such a way where I know none of us had any idea what he was reading, but it sounded so wonderful just with the music of that vernacular that it came to life. And then, you read the translation. And I got to the point of where Hrothgar hired Beowulf, and then he comes in, and it's all about murder and mayhem, and I just got stuck on that whole concept of, I'm sorry, if a bunch of drunken Danes moved into my homeland, I'd be a little ticked off too. So my final capstone paper, I took the position of Grendel and Grendel's mother and made that case. So that it always kind of buried into my background as I kept going forward. The screen, decades and decades, it keeps working on me. And then, because of just a lot of good synchronicity, finally figured the way I could enter into that without being a medievalist and feeling like a sham who could not do a translation, I just created a sister who lived as long as most of those individuals, the Anathians, did, so that she could live for many, many centuries and tell her tale finally, when she's able to take agency and take a stand and save another little girl's life in a certain kind of way. So I think that's the whole arc. So I'm going to read two sections because I definitely wanted Cass to read something from her amazing Humming the Blues, because you've got to hear it too. All right? I said that right, didn't I? Okay, good. All of a sudden I had an idea. Wait, was it called that or Humming the Jazz? That would be okay. So what happens at this point is the tribe has a labyrinth, and the labyrinth has powers, and it's a way that the members of the tribe gain truths, gain insights, go in and have fun. In the case of the kids of Grendel and they are twins, sisters, and Rosotis is the sister. Yenheth is the name that I have given to Grendel's mother. The spring day is glorious in promise. Grendel and I are young, and we leave our duties in the gardens to spend time in the labyrinth. We race each other to the entrance, and Grendel dashes ahead of me, calling back over his shoulder, "Just try to keep up with me. See, sister, I am stronger and faster than you." "You are not," I shriek as I run after him and into the labyrinth. As always, the engraved images enthrall me more than any youthful game. Soon I stop listening for Grendel's footfall and do not care if I catch up to him. Instead, I lean into the sounds the labyrinth offers. I find myself held by a stone on which figures become the leaves and branches of a tree, softening and turning, flush with color, and I am rocked and wrapped gently within the now pulsing limbs. I close my eyes and drift into a soft slumber. When I awake, I find myself stretched out along the base of the wall at a corner. The sun is warm, and it is quiet. I complete my journey into the labyrinth's center, make my way back out, and do not encounter Grendel. I assume he simply did not want to disturb me while I was resting and passed me on his way out. We meet again at our evening meal. I expect him to tease me about having failed to catch him in the labyrinth, but he is silent and brooding over his bread and cheese. I think nothing more about it. Days later, Grendel and I walk through the settlement and come near the labyrinth's entrance. Try to catch me this time, Grendel. I shall show you who is truly swifter and stronger, I shout as I dash toward the portal. Grendel stands fixed at the labyrinth's entrance and cries out to me, Rhosodus, please, come back. Don't make me follow you there. I am here. I stop just before the first turn in the wall. Come and seek me. Do not be afraid. I am not afraid, he bellows. But the rocks are so dark. And the creatures, they want to devour me. They have begun to say horrible things to me. Dark? It is midday, Grendel. The labyrinth will not harm you. Come in, come toward me. The voices from the stones are not malevolent. Their images are well fit and made. Nothing will harm you. No. Grendel bolts toward me to catch me into his arms and prevent me from going any farther. They are waiting for me. They shift and move, following me, hating me. I look into his eyes and see terror there. What is it? What happened to you? We lean against each other and lurch out of the labyrinth. I guide him to a sycamore tree where he collapses, trembling in my arms. The last time I came into the labyrinth, I saw things, he whispers. We all do. That is part of the power. No, this was different. The creatures of the walls, they told me what would become of me, and he presses his head into my shoulder and lets me hold him. I try to comfort him with tender strokes and soft song at his ear. Then he hears our mother Yenheth calling for him, pushes away, leaves me alone with my confusion. And after that, if you do know the Beowulf myth, there's a lot of murder, mayhem. He is mortally wounded. He's carried back into the sea cavern where they've descended in order to try to get away from the small-headed. We are, just to fill it in, what I refer to as the small-headed, it's us. All of the locust-like behavior, white people and other individuals that kind of just cannot know any end to consumption and not. So not the Anathians. Okay. So this is after he's been wounded, brought back into their den, and she tries to figure things out. When I re-enter the sea cavern, I am exhausted, but certain I made the right choice. I discovered Yenheth sleeping in our den, curled around Grendel's corpse. She has worked strong magic and has coated his limbs with waxy balm made heady with sage and yarrow, and his skin is still smooth and gleaming. I almost expect to see him gasp the fetid cavern air and arise with words of greeting for me. Silent as a seed, I rest next to my mother until she awakens. Without resistance, she lets me take her into my arms, and I sing songs of healing and comfort. This gentle time between us does not last, and at evening, she pushes away from me. She huddles closer to Grendel and covers her head with her arms. I brew her favorite tea from chamomile and fennel. She pours it into the ground. I braise fish with wild onions and sage. She tastes none of it. Alone with her grief, she does not speak to me. The sea cavern echoes with her wailing grief. I try to touch her, try to bring her back to me again, but she thrusts away my hands and turns her back to me. I rest against the archway of the labyrinth and wish some guidance or comfort would emerge from this remnant of our past, but it is silent, and I wonder if this is my ancestors' way of grieving, of bringing me their heavy sorrow. In my dreams, I'd rejoin the others from the tribe and discover them still at sea and ask them to come back for us. In response, they offer sympathy, but hold to their decision. Their voices grow fragile. They drift farther away. It is more difficult to find them in my dreamscape as well as in the waking dream world. I stay in the sea cavern, alone with my mother and the corpse of my brother Grendel. It really doesn't get a whole lot better than that, but ultimately there's redemption. So Cass, will you come up?
Sure. Well, you're really in for some old stuff tonight. I, at one point in my teaching and learning about women writers, decided I wanted to find the very earliest of women writers. And after a while, I realized that to do that, all I needed to do was go sign up for the course in Sumerian cuneiform at the University of Minnesota. And I could do it. And that is what I did for the next couple of years. And at one point, my professor, Daniel Reisman, said, "What are you doing here? You're an English prof. What are you trying to learn Sumerian and Akkadian for?" And I told him, I want to find the earliest of feminist writers. He said, "Oh my God, you think that's what's going on back there?" And I said, "I do." And he said, "Well, there's one, and she is the first author or poet in the history of the world to claim a text, but that's the only one I could tell you about right now." I said, "That's enough." That's good, that's enough, because I really had this strong belief that if you go back, everybody was talking, all the spiritual feminists, about God being a woman. I thought if God was a woman, the writers and editors were women too. So I found her in Hedwana. And what the text that she claimed about 2350 BC was a song to the god Inanna, written in cuneiform, which is pictographs. And they can press into clay with a sedge, and they can have many different meanings, each one of those signs. And they can have like 5, 10, 15 different meanings. The first sign in Hedwana's text is a sign that can mean priest, poet, prince, a god, and sister. And the song is a song to Inanna, who is a Sumerian deity, and the language is ungendered. And I thought, well, what's more appropriate than to start, instead of starting out my interpretation of Hedwana's work. And what I realized I was writing was my own prose poem, and I was doing it really in a jazz poetic style, because I was allowing myself, the only way I could get it down in a way that anybody wanted to read it was if I let myself riff on the signs. So I thought, I'm going to start riffing with Sister. That makes sense. So I'm going to read the first stanza, and then I want to read just a couple where you can see that she's claiming the text, which is really her case for fame in Hedwana. Sister, sometimes I think I ought to call you the Queen of the May, the way you toss light like yellow dandelions out of a basket here and there. Or maybe I should call you God, the way you've wrapped the laws of heaven and earth around your waist like a belt. The way you skim over chaos like a quick silver river. But I call you Sister because you're like the rest of us, opening like a pale morning, swelling like a storm, clutching the torch of longing to your breast until you feel life at your throat, until you're all dressed up in flames. Sweet sister, you know it all. A woman's desire is deep, and you're the measure of it. And I'm going to just hop into two little short stanzas where she claims the text. And in the first one that I'm going to read, it includes what I call my urskat, which is I put in the syllables that the Sumerian scholars gave to the signs. They don't really have any meaning for sound, but those are the names that the signs that are in this stanza have, and I realized that that's my scat in my jazz book. Here. I read the lines of your text. I repeat the list of your names, Sister Shasal Sal. You're more brilliant than two suns swirling in the sky. I recite your list of wonders so the people will remember your wisdom. Salzisha Salsal. There's no doubt about it. You raise your arms like wings, and your wishes fly out between my trembling lips like prayers, escaping from the sweet long grasses. Salzisha Salzal. Shashura. Shashura. I'm the instrument, playing your mystical songs. I'm the priest chanting your holy words. I and Hedwana, the poet who writes this verse for you. I hold on to your words like treasure, wear your words like precious stones. And when I cup them in my hands, they're weightless, like petals from a dry rose. So I blow them to the north, south, east, and west. And from my room high above the city, your song drifts to people everywhere. Thank you.
We each get our own mics. Want to stay for karaoke? All right, Cass, I have to, while you get settled back in. This is like our first time being physically in the same room with each other, and we don't know how that happened because we have so many people in common. And a dear friend of mine had given me a copy of Nin not too long after it was published, and loved that novel. And just knowing your role as an advocate and programmer and creator of an amazing MFA program with Augsburg, and just your writing is amazing, and Humming the Blues just carries on with that. And so I'm so glad we can talk. Okay. My first question for you, a little bit off of what we had talked about earlier, though, I wanted to hear a little, for the rest of us as well, one of your earliest encounters with wanting to, you mentioned it a little bit, but say more about encountering the spirit. I'm trying to point at the intro in Humming the Blues of that experience that you had of connecting with other things. Yeah.
Well, that in the intro to Humming the Blues, I talk a little bit about spiritual feminism and what I found myself having the experience of, and that kind of drove me to go ahead and spend all my nights writing, trying to figure out what Anawan was saying. But I think the anecdote you're talking about is, as I was a Peace Corps volunteer, and we lived on the edge of an eroding hill in Colombia. And one night there was this really strange howl and noise all around behind us in the hills, and it was really very frightening. But I didn't know what it was, and I got up in the morning, went outside to see if it could have been what I called our neighborhood birds, which were vultures that were hanging up in the trees. And just then some of the neighbors came up. We were in this wonderful project that allowed us to build our house while the people who had been made homeless by the violence out in the countryside built their houses. So we were building alongside them, and they came up in the morning. They said, "Last night, did you hear La Llorona? La Llorona was in the hills, and she was howling for her children." And I thought, I did. I heard La Llorona last night. So it just really struck me, the strong spirit of
Those voices.
the voice.
I mean, her voice.
The voice of the spirit
Right.
from the stories, from mythology. And I thought, I have actually experienced mythology. Yeah, so that kept me going.
Which I think both of us have been attracted to, that whole aspect of reclaiming that feminine core to the goddesses and to those individuals that.
Well, I'm fascinated both by your book and what you just gave us a little bit of up there, because it is, I think, something that we find happening now in literature, where women writers are doing what Estella Lauder calls remythologizing and unventing the dominant story. And it was fun for me to hear you give your origin story on noticing the dominant story.
Right.
And it reminded me of Margaret Atwood reading the Odyssey and saying, no, I don't want all those maids of Penelope killed like that. That's not right. So she wrote the Penelopead.
Right.
And this is that same kind of unvention that you have done, and you've allowed yourself to notice the alienation that a woman must feel when they see this male hero.
When they're shut out. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Definitely.
yeah.
And we talked, well, and how some of that hero myth keeps coming back as to be a hero means that you murder and you overtake and you are, it's conquest versus what, when you keep tracing back, because you also, the rabbit hole that you go into when you do this kind of a work and you do the research is you go far back to get as authentic as you can to and then some of the other aspects of at a time when there wasn't a divide. The female male aspect was so collective or wrapped together that it really didn't. It's not that it didn't matter. You had to have both. One was not better than the other.
And that's the story of Inanna, which is the who is the god that Enheduanna writes to, because Inanna, it's interesting to note that Inanna was a god. Sumerian is an ungendered language. There's no goddesses or godettes.
I love godettes. Godette.
Yeah. Inanna was a female, and she was a god, and she was very strong. And Carrie's done a lot of work with Persephone, but Inanna, quite a bit earlier, she came out of this earlier time where women could work and they could have money and they had their children at work with them, and this was before the next group came in, who were much more masculinist, and the language changes and everything. You could see that happening. But Inanna wasn't captured. She wasn't dragged away. She wasn't kidnapped. She knew that you could not go to this place called the Land of No Return. Some people call it hell, but other people call it the Netherworld. Inanna knew you couldn't go there. No man, woman, child, God had ever gone there and come back. And so one day she said, "I'm going." So she was somebody who really was very strong.
And that legend is yoked with Gilgamesh too.
She and Gilgamesh, that's kind of another little literary quarrel.
Yeah.
Which story came first?
Yeah.
Inanna's or Gilgamesh's? And what I found is that Gilgamesh is mentioned in the Inanna stories, and Inanna is mentioned in the Gilgamesh stories. So I think they were around the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Inanna story, at the very end, she gets out, but she has to send somebody down to take her place. And cutting to the end of the last gate, she gets out. There's her husband, Dumuzi, otherwise known as Tablets in the Bible, and he's having a party out in the garden. and one of the things that she had told everybody, she told her assistant, if I'm not back in 3 days and 3 nights, put on sackcloth and ashes, weep and mourn, and come and get me. And he didn't even know she was gone. So the gods who were chasing her out of the Netherworld said, "We'll take Dumuzi," and she said, "Be my guest." And so what happened then in the end was he got chased, and that's another whole story and saga, but in the end, the two gods, the female and the male, share the time. One is there, and then the other's there. So there's a strong sense of balance in that era of Mesopotamia.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're
talking
about.
Kept being attracted to that.
Yeah.
For the whole. There are wonderful sagas too in Northern European traditions as well, but it's a different. I always found it had a different timbre to it, a different
Yeah.
tone to
Yeah.
it that I was pushing against.
Yeah.
Because it's like it's older than that.
Yeah.
There's more
Yeah.
truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I want to ask you about this because one of the first lines in Sister of Grendel is where you name
Mm.
Rusodis' mother
Mm-hmm.
and Grendel's mother.
Mm-hmm.
And in the, I go back and check with my Shamus Haney and see what's going on here, but he doesn't ever name her at all.
No, and she's still the witch, you know, the mere wife, and just
The swamp hag.
the swamp hag.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet, in your story, you allow her to be named,
Mhm.
and in naming her, we see her as the leader of the tribe,
Right.
rather than part of nature. So, can you talk a little bit about her and her?
I think that was part of just reclaiming that narrative too, where I had Rasodis' name before I had Yenheth, but and Rasodis, this is one of those. Okay, so it's not the typical fiction that I write. I do tend to spend more time in contemporary times, but when this all started to happen, it was as close to kind of that woo, I'm channeling this woman's voice that I've ever been at, and I kept referring to her as her, or not having the name. And then I was writing it in snips during my noon hour break when I was working at Carleton College in corporate foundation relations. And I put my hands back to home on the keyboard, if you know where that is. Closed my eyes and said, I'm tired of not having your name. Will you just give me your name? And just went, okay, the keys, and looked up, and honest to God, I know this sounds really weird, but her name was there, so it was Rasodis, and took off with that. And that was that same type of conversation that I had, as well as looking at you do it in an amazingly scholarly way. I was looking at what are some of the sounds of some of the names of some of those ancient tribes, ancient peoples that would fit that, and that's when the Yenheth, the rhythm of that, is what caught me at that point, too, and with the other characters as well.
Yeah.
But it was important to it's not just Grendel's mother. She
Yeah.
had a whole life
Yeah.
before that.
And by naming her, you gave her executive power.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is really very interesting.
She goes a little over the edge, but
Yes. Yeah, she does. She does. Can I ask you about another theme?
sure.
Okay. Another theme that I saw happening over and over and over again till the very end
Mhm.
is that Rasodis, and she says it about herself,
Mhm.
she often finds herself not able to close the gap.
Yes.
She
Yeah.
couldn't save her brother Grendel.
Right.
She couldn't save her mother.
Yeah. She never has.
Yeah. She's watching and she's observing and she feels that that's her duty.
Or
You know.
or that she doesn't have enough power to
Okay.
claim more
Right.
of that, and that was one of the things. One of my earlier readers, he would talk about how she fails again and again. It's like, but that's how life is sometimes, and that's why we keep. Those are those engines in our lives, and that was for her. Every time she got a little bit closer, when she spends time in a monastery and isn't able to save a friend. And then she later is in an abbey and she isn't able to save the sisters, and this is grounded in truth in terms of just the pogroms that would take place in early Christianity when the Catholic Church was really staking its claim. If you didn't adhere to what the church fathers wanted, they would hire mercenaries, they would hire others, and they would come in and just wipe out these convents. And it was definitely women that were rejected or women that weren't of hierarchy in their landed family to get enough money other than to have a little piece of land. So so she failed there, and then she's in a smaller village, and again the small-headed come. She starts to think that because I'm here, these small-headed, these Northern Europeans, I mean, they're not known as Europeans then, but you know, that's what they're coming. They're trying to drive me out, and finally she realizes that's not it. This is just what's going on. And then when she's finally in the forest with the family, and she can save Ruth Anna from being victimized at some point, she finally takes that step, and then knows, when she knows that she's dying, she's really clearly compelled to write that last chronicle and gain her voice, that at least in telling her story she can also take more of a stand.
And she does at
And
that
she does.
point.
Right.
And she does it by writing.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 Which
Good.
is what you're, you know, with
Putting it
humming
on
the
it
blues.
as-
And
yeah.
I have to practice it. The rhythm of that woman's name. A new hero. Are we okay? We're supposed to watch, because I want you to talk.
Is anybody gonna tell us when we're running out of time for this? No, we're good.
I'll tell you
Okay.
when, yeah.
I want you to talk about what you're working on next, though.
Well, I'm working on the novel that we heard a little bit in the introduction, and it's very different. From Nin is the story about the history of women's writing, and I call it a comedy, not because it's funny, but because it ends well. And then this is, and Hedwana is a character in Nin, and I've kind of left that all aside, except there is some magical realism in the new project, and it's about, it's a story that is set in the Alhambra, and it is told by 4 different characters, and one of them is a woman who is the director of the Alhambra. Another, and the centerpiece in the Alhambra, which is the last remaining castle of the Moors in Spain, and one of the most beautiful artifacts in the Alhambra is the Fountain of the Lions, and I have set up a fictional possibility that something has happened to one of the lions, and the director is worried that some art malfeasance might be taking place. Maybe someone has replaced one of the lions, because during the time of Ferdinand and Isabella, they spouted beautifully, and all of a sudden they weren't doing that. And so she's very worried, and she hires a guy who is an authenticist, who's an American, used to be an FBI agent. She gets hold of him, and then there's 2 other characters who come in. One is the director of the Alhambra's assistant, who's a young, just post-PhD. He's a Cuban, and he believes that he is the many generations down grandson of Christopher Columbus's Jewish translator. And that person, Christopher Columbus's Jewish translator, is a historical character. He did exist, and he went on the first voyage. And so it's interesting, because this is a character who's going back to Spain to try and find his story rather than leaving Spain. And the other person is a young, fictional young woman who is visiting Spain, also going back to find her family's history, because her family is related to one of the scholars of Moorish philosophy, and so she wants to get back, and they were very interested in folk tales. He had written part of an encyclopedia that included references to the early Sanskrit folk tales, and he's a real historical figure too, that she's trying to find. So
braiding the real with the
braiding the contemporary, the fictional, the young people with their ancestors going back, and then of course there's all the possible documents and the whole history. So they all have ties back in 1492. What is the story is now.
Can't wait. Addie, do we one question?
Yeah, you want to move on to questions from the audience, if anyone has one?
Yes.
I just have a comment. When you were talking earlier, it suddenly struck me when you were talking about Grendel, and his, about the hero's journey of killing and, maiming and overtaking. It sort of struck me in that situation because it's like kill or be killed, and the hero's journey is always about doing. And in this case, her journey is about processing, and in this case, voicing what it is that she experiences from all of this. So it's very interesting. We talked earlier about the balance in the Sumerian culture. It's like that's how like they're balancing each other out. He's the one having to experience this tragedy, but then she's the one who has to like process all of it. She's the witness, and then processing and giving it voice.
Oh, of course I thought about that. Just kidding. I like that. That works. Yeah. One of the things that too, along that same line too, is just in terms of a female dealing with this kind of a story usually is because she's thrust into exile. She's sent out. I go back to like Adam's first wife, Lilith, who was sent out of Eden because she consorted with devils. Well, of course, it's because it's the male retelling of it that they were devils. She was claiming agency of her life, too. But that's her versus the hero story of I'm going out, I'm taking on my own adventure, and, it's my choice. But you set that on its ear.
Well, I was just wondering.
She was, yeah.
Well, yeah, I was just wondering if anything has changed. I mean, we see a lot of.
There's a lot of Beowulf out there.
Yeah, a lot of people, a lot of women writers are feeling that alienation from the dominant story and writing new work. But has our notion of the hero changed? And I mentioned to you the other day when we were talking, I accidentally turned on a series on TV called Reacher. Is anybody watching?
Yes.
I mean, there's Beowulf, if I ever saw him. He just plunders his way into town to do good. Yeah. And I'm wondering, I did bring along a little, there's another translation other than
Davana's Headley.
Yeah. Everybody knows about
Translation of Beowulf, not a departure of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Everybody knows about Haney and everybody knows about Tolkien, but this is one that was just published in 2020. She won a number of prizes for it, and I thought it was kind of fun because of what she's doing with language. It reminded me a little bit of my grabbing sister out of the lexicon, and she starts out this way. This is her first. This is Maria Davana Headley. Bro, tell me we still know how to talk about kings. In the old days, everyone knew what men were: brave, bold, glory-bound. Only stories now, but I'll sound the spear-dane song, hoarded for hungry times. And the fun thing I found in just cruising the internet is that she got a lot of criticism for dealing with this text in such a way that she said, bro. And one of the strongest criticisms was, she sounds like she's talking to white fraternity brothers. What's going on?
And we were just saying, but that kind of is what Beowulf was.
Yeah, so he was kind of the equivalent, the medieval equivalent of a white fraternity brother coming into town. Yeah. So I think she captured something very interesting about the story that we haven't seen in the other translations, beautiful though they are. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely the music.
Yeah.
And the sound.
Yes.
Okay.
Brian.
Back in 1975, Elin Sixu wrote an article called The Laugh of the Medusa. And it really triggered quite a response. It was a reinterpretation of the myth of Medusa. And unfortunately, I haven't been keeping up. And I'm just wondering, is there still a lot of feminist reinterpretation of classical myths that's going on? Yeah.
Well, Cass mentioned, no,
The
but you
big
mentioned Atwoods,
Atwood's a while back.
and then
yeah.
Circe
Mm.
came out not too
Yeah.
long
Okay.
ago as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's rich.
Yeah, it really is. It is rich. But you are a wonderful writer to behold, because here you are
Mhm.
bringing us back to life, taking us to Beowulf
Mhm.
and beyond.
Mhm.
That's the important thing, I think, is that
Yeah.
you've done something quite different than Atwood, but
Right.
yeah, but
Right.
there it is,
Yeah.
definitely.
Seems to me there's an awful lot of work to be done there.
There is
Work
not to, yeah,
Yeah.
And Shakespearean characters. As
yeah,
well.
we're not to
You know.
stop, yeah. And it'd be okay if men wanted to do this too. Virginia Woolf.
Virginia Woolf.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, this is more of a comment, and I want to make sure I got the title right, so I looked it up. And it's pre-myth, sort of. I've been reading Eve, which is subtitled How the Female Body Drove 200 Million Years of Human Evolution. And it's by a woman named Kat Bohannon. And it's a marvelous book. I'm not done with it. But one of the things that you come away from, I think, from the reading, realizing is if you have, ever had the feeling, and I think as women we have, and of course it goes, back to myth, of being weaker, secondary, standing behind, your man. You read this book and realize that that is just all false. It's just completely false. We have been sold a bill of goods.
Mm.
And we wouldn't be here today talking about this even, and we wouldn't even have had those myths if women had not been the incredibly strong major drivers of the evolutionary culture. I mean, it's just, I recommend the book to everybody. It's been very significant to me,
Yeah.
very powerful.
And does she delve into a more even a biological?
She looks at it, yeah, more
Okay.
from a biological perspective. So she looks at, childbirth, child rearing. She looks at different aspects of, the brain, for example. Everything we know about the brain is. And she also looks at the studies that have been done. Studies that have been done that have mainly been studies on male figures, and not including a lot of the clinical studies that have been done on men and not on women, and so not getting an accurate portrayal. One of the things that she says that I found remarkable is that there are significant differences biologically between men and women, but in terms of the brain, there really isn't any difference.
That's interesting.
Everything is cultural.
Hmm.
Everything.
Well, and I mean, just the work that's being done on neuroplasticity as well, in terms of how the brain isn't a static. No pun in there, is it? Just, I mean, it keeps. You can change it. You can shift it. You can rewire it. So just think in terms. Right. Yeah. Okay. I've got to get that book. Okay. Thanks, Gary.
Dreams.
Yes.
Yeah.
Carrie and Candace are in book club with me, and we've read your book.
I want to go to that. I want to be in that book club.
And I know that everybody was very interested in what you're doing with dreams.
Oh, the
because
dream guiding.
the
Yeah.
Enathians can, they can read other people's, they
They
can read the
can
dreams
go
of
into each other's.
into each other and into the small-headed.
Yeah.
Can you
to
talk a
scare the
little
crap out
bit
of them
about, yeah, tell us about that.
And that was something that came up in like even my early research as well. Oh, now I'm gonna forget the name of the author, which I hate doing. But it's like Curious Yellow or something like that. But his whole tenet, or what he presented, was that a long time ago, we had more than 5 senses. And when people would refer to how you have a sense of direction, or you have just that instinct kind of thing. And the whole reality of the brain is we could hear color, we could see sense. I mean, there were things that we could do, and we just kind of shut down on all of that. And one of those senses too, and if we look even at just as common as it is, Old Testament understanding and valuing of dreams and how people could enter dreams, or you just took that seriously in a whole different way. So that was my riff on that of, well, I mean, the Anathians just had a lot more going on so many levels, and this would be another way where they knew we can do this too. We have power within that realm, and I had fun with that. And that was one of those conveniences, I guess, in terms of what I could do with the book, because I knew I wanted Beowulf and Rhosodus to come face to face with each other, because he didn't see her. He didn't see her. She was standing there at the beginning, and again, it was his failing. He didn't see this woman while he's killing her mother.
Yeah, he didn't see her at all. And that's one of the places where she couldn't close the gap and kill him.
Right.
But he didn't know
Right.
that she was there.
Right.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. But he does come back
Mm-hmm.
in a dream.
Mm-hmm. And it's after he's lived his whole life and he's slayed dragons and all of that kind of stuff too.
And what is that? Is that an attempt on the part of Beowulf
One more nod.
to be given forgiveness?
I wanted him to have accountability. I wanted him to see how he was a part of that story, and that maybe he didn't make the right choice.
And does he? Does he make? Does he get?
Do you
Does he
think
get
he did?
absolute? I wondered. Did she give him absolution?
At that point to it, I think at the end of that scene, I don't think she really cares anymore. I think for her, it's like, all right, I'm done. That's, yeah. There's no way I can rewrite how you're going to see, or it's that futility we all have when somebody's grounded in their position. You can't convince them otherwise.
So she doesn't try to fix the male hero.
No.
No.
I think she knows it's not fixable. He's not fixable.
Yeah.
Yeah. At least I didn't want him to be fixable at that point.
Yeah, that's right.
I could be persuaded otherwise.
There's something I want to mention. I won't ask you to read it unless you want to read it. Okay. It is what Marianne Grossman called one of the most beautiful lyrical passages in the novel.
I loved her. I didn't pay her to write that. I really didn't. But, I mean, I know we all adore Marianne Grossman, but it was like, oh my God.
Yeah, and she kind of shortened it down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Would you read her shortened down if I gave it to you?
Yeah,
I
you
just
could.
happen to have it here.
You have little post-it notes in my book. I can't tell you how cool that is.
This is a passage from it is dreamy,
Yes.
but this is between Rhosodus and Yargus.
Yargus.
You want to tell us a little bit about
Oh,
it?
well, so I think the overall is this is a woman who's trying to find her tribe. She's trying to find home. She's trying to find her place. And then when she's with the brothers, she can tell there's one of my kind here on this island, and he becomes their lover, and he is and then he leaves because of other stuff, which is why you have to get the book, right, to find out why he has to.
Yeah.
Right.
And so what Marianne Grossman did is she kind of shortened it down a little bit
Yeah,
for her
I think she
reading.
had to kind of clean it up.
She maybe cleaned it up a little, but if you buy the book, you can read the whole thing.
Okay, all right. Seems okay.
Yeah.
Oh, this part. All right.
Yeah.
This was fun to write, because I know it can't really happen, but it's still fun to think it could. We turned together into the waves, falling deeper into the cove. His mouth covers mine, and I am spread open, arms outstretched like wings, back arching, and Yargus enfolds me into his warmth. We drift deep into the water, spiral and grasp each other in a water dance. Now I am not cold, not frightened. We do not need to breathe. We do not breathe. Instead, the water fills us with more desire for each other. Salt water mixes us together. We turn into something else. Another version of ourselves, as liquid as the sea, yet solid as marble, and there are the colors. Colors that fill our minds. Red deepens to violet, yellow plumes upon, open into emerald. That's all. Any other questions
Or comments?
or comments? I'm kind of looking at Mary a little bit because she's one of my heroes of claiming voice as well. And I don't mean to put you on the spot at all, but do you feel comfortable just giving a comment on the women that you've reclaimed as well to give voice to in literature, or not?
Well, I'll tell you.
Good.
I feel like this whole conversation is about a world that I do not know exists. So I'm sort of following you through it and trying to put two and two together. I mean, one of the references that made a lot of sense to me was the reference to Richard and what that character is and how that is a Beowulf character. I don't know it from Beowulf. But anyway, I'm at sea a little bit. What is it you want me to say about reclaimed women? Because I have written them. I have to say I have been them somehow.
Yeah.
And it is, I would never have thought of it in relationship to this conversation, but now that you bring it up, I mean, that certainly was the sense with Eliza Winston. I cannot explain how I know about her. And some of it's research. I mean, I kept looking for things, and the things that I couldn't find, and what could I make up? What would make sense out of the research that I have done, that I had done. So she became a very real person to me. Is this what you mean?
That is what I was thinking of, how it's not, there are so many layers and so many stories
Yeah.
for so many
Right.
different groups and times and
Yeah.
cultures and nationalities and locales. And now, it's happening now too, so. Okay. You're giving up?
Like, if there are no more questions or comments, we can go sign books. But if people have another question or two, we have plenty of time.
Thank you,
Okay.
Cass.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.